there's a lot of talk about existential risk and global catastrophes. And it's interesting to see who the people are who speak of this. And I find it interesting that even people like Geoffrey Hinton, who is a computer scientist himself, as you know, starts talking in this way. There is a risk if one gets to artificial general intelligence, but it isn't, there's so much debate around when we will get there, what it will actually mean, and making people fearful about the technology actually in the end also means that more and more people become interested in it and want to stay as far as possible on top of it, and that actually just feeds profit for these big tech companies. So I think one should really think, hard before listening to the existential risk stories. Textualism and hype, specifically on this continent, AI is sold to us by the global north in terms of tech solutionism. Let's bank unbanked African women. I can give you so many different examples. And on the global stage, Africa is portrayed as users of this technology, and with our hands out, please give us access to the technology, please give us. This is not the case, the real case on the ground approach of tech solutionism. So the AI business model is focused on commodification of data for profit, but in the end for geopolitical power. And Susanna Zuboff in 2019 wrote this really interesting book on surveillance capitalism as the AI business model, and showed that we are dealing here with a process of digital dispossession where humans become understandable and profitable. So our behavioral data is enriching people that are not our own people. Humans become ranked and rated data subjects. Based on exclusion fed by digital poverty, intersectionality, tech solutionism, and geopolitical realities that allow big tech companies to exploit people in Africa, even though what they are doing is against international labor law. So big tech companies need a place, a continent like Africa, where they can find workers to do their reinforcement learning work for them and label data sets for next to nothing. And I'm sure that many of you have read about the impact of some of this labeling, of some of the data that are sometimes, especially if you think in terms of unmanned vehicles, it's sometimes really upsetting, and there's very little recourse for people to get help. Apart from the fact that they're exploited in terms of salary and working conditions. So we have to think about speaking about the politics of data. And data is the currency of politics in the times that we live in. So algorithmic colonialism disempowers Africans to effectively participate in global AI technology's life cycle. It targets and exploits vulnerable groups. If you're not protected by some data protection regulation and your government does not protect your data in sufficient ways, then you stand at real danger. You're in danger of being exploited in terms of your data. It amplifies inequality and structural and epistemic injustice, and it creates dependency on Western software and infrastructure. So it is really important to try and protect the data in your particular region or your particular country. But at the same time, it is really important that there is a free flow, cross-border flow of data. And almost all cross-border transactions in terms of trade have a digital component. So the free flow of data has unlocked innovation in all economic sectors on this continent and across the world. But paradoxically, There is also a global adoption of cross-border data restrictions, particularly in the case of data localization requirements. So it seems as if data localization is against economic growth, where very often, and I can give you examples of countries like, for instance, Nigeria and Rwanda, where it is described as instigators or catalysts for economic growth. So why is it that countries want to adopt data localization requirements? Then, latching onto what I just said, they want to ensure data privacy and protection and cybersecurity, and this is really important and something that the African Union has made very clear also in terms of the Malabo Convention. Sometimes to support local law enforcement by ensuring that local authorities have access to data, for government censorship and surveillance in certain regions, to mitigate geopolitical risk and financial sanctions, and then for economic development purposes. And this is most often cited as the reason for data localization processes on this continent. So there are three main types of data localization requirements. Governments can either restrict the transfer of data outside their borders. So they have very strict localization requirements. So it's the data cannot leave the country, or they restrict only data that are considered to be sensitive or related to national security, or they permit cross-border data flows, but under certain conditions. And these conditions are called conditional flow regimes. And an example is, for instance, the GDPR in the North. It is possible for data to flow from the UK to the EU, to the US, and so on, but there has to be compliance with the GDPR. So the problem is that there are there's a lot of evidence, and we can talk about it if there's time in question time, to just argue or assume that the best way to reap economic benefits of data is to hoard it behind a country's borders. In the end, only the few companies that are directly connected to data collection and data storage benefit. But all other companies that need data to make a profit, to actually do what it is that they're supposed to do, will not benefit. So one has to think about how one wants to talk about data localization, and not just say it will inevitably contribute to economic growth on this continent, because it seems that the evidence is against it. Data's value is maximized when it can flow with trust and permission across sectors and national borders. So what is important is that we need policies that allow this flow, but at the same time ensure safety and security and equal access. So we need multilateral commitments on cross-border data flows. And two really important pieces of regulation exist already and has come into being because of the African Union's work on this continent, and that we have to really think about them when we talk about data localization and data sovereignty. There's the African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into being in 2019. It's the biggest trade agreement in the world, with 55 countries and 8 economic communities, regional economic communities incorporated in this agreement. And it is about setting up a single continental market for services and goods on this continent. It's part of the African Union 2063 agenda, and it's a flagship project for that agenda. And then we also have the Malabo Convention, which already came into being quite a few years before it was finally ratified in 2023. And the Malabo Convention is also known as the Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, and it's also an African Union convention. And this is an example of a really powerful conditional flow regime. So it is a treaty that allows, a convention that allows for a free flow of data, but at the same time it protects privacy and information of citizens on this continent. Unfortunately, at the moment, there are only 15 African states that have subscribed to it. So there's still a very long way to go to get this up and running. So then if we think broader in terms of data sovereignty, because data localization happens because of data sovereignty, data sovereignty is the recognition of the rights of nation states to develop policy instruments to govern AI technology within their legal territory, and it's about the rights of all people